Welcome back to my channel, all pianists, teachers, students. Today I wanted to talk about the importance of incorporating technique within the private studio. Technique, that can sound so scary to some of us. In my studio, we have a wonderful routine of starting out our practicing at the very beginning with 10 minutes of technique. And I do have technique sheets that I've incorporated into the studio, all based on level. I have level 1 all the way through level 10. They're graded so that the first level is very basic and easy, starting out with the most simple 5-finger patterns, basic cadences, hand over hand arpeggios. And these work their way all the way up to level 10, where the student is then doing Russian scales, modulations, all kinds of difficult progressions, and so the student has continued to feel challenged. Now, as a teacher, it's important that we teach our students this technique so that they develop that agility, that flexibility, the speed, the strength within the fingers, because we all know that the really good repertoire requires that kind of technique, those kinds of fingers. And granted, we can wait to introduce those concepts to our students when they're playing the pieces, so that they have to work extra hard, drilling and spotting those scalar passages, those arpeggio, difficult sections or chords. But it's much easier if beforehand they have been consistently working on these techniques, so that when they show up in the repertoire, it's just a matter of plugging them in. The fingers can play them, they can play it well, clean, and ultimately the student can learn and memorize the piece faster if they're already familiar with the different scales, the different keys, because they've been working on them regularly. Now, we only have to look back to the great virtuoso Franz Liszt as the perfect example of a pianist who really devoted time and energy to developing technique and really making something of themselves. Liszt was influenced by the violin virtuoso Paganini, and after hearing him, he was determined to be able to develop the same type of technique, the same ability. And so Liszt devoted 4 to 5 hours a day of practice to his technique, whether that was practicing thirds, sixths, tremolos, repeated notes, cadenza-like passages. He had as his goal to develop his technique so that he could be just as good as Paganini. And I don't think that there's any arguing that he succeeded. He truly was an incredible pianist who had amazing technique. You know that if you ever play any of his repertoire, because it just requires those fingers that have to have had a lot of practice with technique. And so he's a wonderful example. And granted, we can't ask of our students to practice 3 to 5 hours of technique a day, but we can ask of them 10 to 15 minutes a day, and to make that a consistent part of their practicing. It's actually a healthy part of practicing to begin every day with warming up the fingers with scales, arpeggios, chords. And then, of course, as part of that, I also highly recommend incorporating a technique selection. And what I have here in my studio that we use regularly is the dozen a day. And these are graded. This is the preparatory level, and obviously well loved. You can tell this has been used a lot. This is a really good book for little young beginners because the exercises are very short and easy, and yet the student is still beginning to learn techniques. If you can see that. And then eventually this will easily lead into a Hanon. And this is my virtuoso Hanon, so this is a little bit more advanced than the junior Hanon. So of course this would come after junior Hanon. But Hanon is wonderful for developing strength and articulation, evenness within the fingers, and the ability to remain clean for a long period of time. What's fun is when the student can play one exercise perfect, you challenge them by having them connect 2 exercises together so that they have to go longer, and the muscles in the forearms right here really get a workout, and that's really, really good for the fingers. For my more advanced students who have been playing for a while, they've worked their way through the entire Hanon book. They're no longer playing dozen a day. I love to then transition them into Czerny exercises. And Czerny is the king of technique exercises. He wrote many, many books dedicated to technique exercises. I like this Czerny Germer Volume 1 edition because the exercises are slightly shorter. But at this point, the student is now able to play these little short pieces. They sound like pieces. They no longer sound like exercises. They're not as monotonous or full of repetition. Instead, it truly sounds like little classical pieces where different techniques are addressed. Maybe it's learning how to play a fast left-hand Alberti bass, or learning how to voice a homophonic texture, or scalar patterns. These are really, really fabulous. Here's a little trill-like pattern where the fingers have to alternate back and forth very quickly. And as a general rule, these do go at a fast tempo, but it also incorporates a real type of musicality that you can help the student develop in short pieces. So I highly recommend as teachers that you help your students develop that ability to play music beautifully and easily through the daily practice of technique. It's not hard to get started if you haven't at this point. Very easy to begin incorporating scales, basic scales, right hand alone, left hand alone. You can do the same thing with arpeggios, hands alone. You can eventually add those hands together and continue to challenge the student. You can even go as far as making up technique charts if you feel like that's something that you would like to do. But it's very, very beneficial for your students. You will find that their repertoire gets harder. They can play more difficult music more easily because of the technique that they've developed. So I wanted to come on here and share with you my thoughts and opinions about technique. And I wish you luck in your private piano teaching. And until next time.